Hello.
Hi.
Hi. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Doing good.
Do you have a few minutes to chat?
You bet.
Okay. I have, I guess, a little bit of a concern with another student. It's been kind of bugging me. I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I don't want to overstep my bounds.
Okay.
But it's been kind of bothering me recently.
Okay. Well, I'd love to help. What's going on?
It's probably not the biggest deal, but there's this student that's been bugging me. I got to know her a little bit in my biochem study group, and we started studying. We got along just fine, and she wanted to keep studying with me kind of throughout biochem and ever since. And recently, I guess it's become a little bit of a concern for me because it's become more than studying.
Okay.
She started texting me, and originally it was about studying, and it's kind of progressed beyond that at this point. She'll text me, she'll call me about things other than that. And I mean, we got, now that I'm starting to look back on things, like I ran into her quite a bit before, and now I've kind of noticed it being more than just a coincidence. I mean, we share a lot of the same classes, but I'll run into her pretty much, I don't know, a lot during the day.
Okay. Every day?
Every day, so a lot during each day.
Okay.
And I go to class, she always beats me to class, and she'll wave me over to come sit with her. If I'm studying in the library and I'm leaving to go to my car, I'll find that she's in her car, parked next to my car, if she hasn't found me already in a study room.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I guess it's been, she started joining me in my study rooms a lot. I've told her she's kind of distracting me because we end up talking about things beyond studying, and she kind of starts to yell a little bit when I ask her to leave. Last time, she actually put herself in front of the door, so I couldn't actually leave. I'd have to physically move her, which I feel a little uncomfortable with. So I started trying to find new spots around campus, little nooks in the library, but she keeps seeming to find me there. I started studying with some other people, and she kind of butts in, distracts us all at that point to talk to me.
Did you ask her to leave you alone? Tell her she's disturbing you?
I did, and she kind of yelled at me, had a little outburst. So I wasn't really sure what to do after that, so I started studying off campus. I started going to coffee shops or the other libraries, and she seems to keep finding me there, which is kind of odd. And so I guess at this point I'm a little unsure whether this is bigger than I'm making it out to be, or like shouldn't be as big as I'm making it out to be, or whether I should be concerned.
Okay. Does she ever physically harm you or touch you in ways you don't want her to?
No, it just kind of keeps appearing out of nowhere, anywhere I am around town. And it's, like I said, it may not be the biggest deal, but it's starting to kind of, at this point, it's more than just I'm feeling distracted from studying. I'm a little worried how often I keep seeing her, and a little worried about I need to establish some space.
Okay, so are you able to study as much as you did before, or as much as you want to?
Not as much as I want to. And what I do get to do, she's always there, so I'm kind of distracted.
Okay.
It's not really effective studying.
So let's talk a little bit about the relevant policies and laws that would be considerations for you as you're talking with a student in this scenario. In terms of policies on Pulse, these are all on Pulse. There's really 3 policies that go into detail and provide some guidance for us relative to what our response needs to be, because we have some laws that also apply. So in terms of our policies that were written to help us meet the obligations of these laws, our discrimination and harassment prohibition policy. In that policy, we define stalking as a violation, as a potential harassing activity. So that's where we get into the idea that while we are uncomfortable with stalking in general, we actually have a policy prohibiting stalking behavior. Our policy on sexual misconduct and sexual misconduct reporting and confidentiality would apply if the motive behind this stalking behavior was based on gender. And we don't quite know that. It didn't come out yet in the questions that came up between the advisor and Jake. We're not sure if the reason that this female student seems to be following him is because of a physical attraction, if she wants to date him, if they had some kind of a romantic relationship that kind of went south. We don't know that yet, but in following up on this, that's one of the questions we'd want to get to, because if we determined that it was gender-based stalking, that puts us in another category in terms of obligations that we have as an institution to respond. Now, in general, we want to respond to help protect our students and enable them to be as productive as they can be, to be comfortable in the academic setting. So Jake was clearly uncomfortable enough that he came forward to talk about something that's a little difficult to talk about. So I think we need to recognize we have policy guidance, and I'll talk about some of the explicit things out of these policies that we want you to be aware of. And again, as I noted, there's 2 federal laws, FERPA, certainly the third one there, from a protecting student information perspective, clearly very important for us to be cognizant of. But the other 2 laws that could apply in this case, Clary Act, we have an obligation to report activity on our public website, crime activity. And Clary was recently revised to include stalking. And if it's gender-based stalking, we have to report stalking incidents on our crime logs. So that's an important question for us to know. And Title IX also is the federal law that provides for protections for students against any kind of gender-based discrimination or harassment in the educational setting. So if we again determine that this case was gender-based, we have to comply with the requirements of Title IX. So we brought this issue up earlier, this duty to report as a responsible employee. I actually don't like the term responsible employee because it implies that everybody who's not on this list is an irresponsible employee. And we know that's not the case, but the language of responsible employee comes to us from the federal legislation. And so we wanted to mirror that in our guidance as well, to demonstrate our intent to comply with those requirements. But as a responsible employee, and you clearly are all responsible employees per the determination, we did an analysis to determine who fits into this category. Responsible employees would have a duty to report that encounter. If you were the faculty member involved in that conversation with that student, you'd have a duty to report that as a responsible employee. And then there's a series of steps that occur after the fact. That frankly, once you report it, you may not find out what happens on the resolution end of certain circumstances. Especially if they fall into categories for Title IX, we may not be in a position to come back and let you know what the outcome was. We don't like you to think there's this black box and nothing's happening, but from a FERPA perspective for confidentiality, we may not be able to come back and tell you. But as a responsible employee, you all have this duty to report to me as the Title IX coordinator. I wear, in addition to being the compliance officer for the institution, I wear the hat of being the Title IX coordinator. And so in those 2 capacities, my role is to help sort this out. What laws apply, which of our policies would apply in terms of how we dealt with the resolution of a case like that. There's another category of employees that I want you to be aware of. And a few of you may, from time to time, become a privileged employee. A privileged employee is someone who has, because of their state licensure, has a state-mandated requirement to offer patients confidentiality or privacy. Deborah is a good example of someone who is always a privileged employee because she is on our campus and her role is to provide counseling services to students, and she's a licensed practitioner. So she is exempted from the duty to report that incident to me. So it's important for you to know that there is a place where students, if they went to Deborah, if that student came to Deborah and talked about that, I may never find out. I wouldn't ever find out about that situation unless in the consultation that Deborah has with the student, she informs him about the ability to report it to me so that we can take some kind of remedial action, which Deborah may not be in a position to take. Other privileged employees, some of you who could be a privileged employee. If you are a licensed clinician and you are providing services to our students in the context of student health, you remove your responsible employee hat, you've now put on your privileged employee hat, and if you find out about a circumstance like the one that Jake reported, because you're seeing them in the clinic as a patient, you have a privilege of not reporting that circumstance. Okay, you revert to the patient care privacy provisions that you have as a licensee. Now, so it's important for you to recognize, when did I find out about this? Did I find out about this because I was taking care of the student as a patient? Did I have a patient relationship with that student? Or did they come to me as their advisor? I'm not treating them as a patient. If you're not treating them, then you don't wear the privileged employee hat. You wear the responsible employee hat. Are there any questions about this? Yes?
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused. You started out by saying that the situation is kind of not, even with the information that's delivered, is not clear.
Mm-hmm.
I, as a faculty member, have absolutely no way of knowing that this is a clear case, it's not a clear case. So, is the takeaway from this that if there is any social complaint that we report to you, or how do we know that this is a reportable thing and this is not?
One of the takeaways today clearly is that you don't have to sort through. Does this meet the definition under the Clery Act of stalking that's reportable under Clery Act? That's not something you all have to suss out. That's part of my role for the institution. So in those gray areas where it's not quite clear, I'd ask you to, I'd rather have you report and us determine that it is not a case that we have to formally investigate. Can I go backwards? Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Okay. Under either our discrimination and harassment prohibition policy still prohibits stalking. So even if it wasn't gender-based stalking, we're still going to address it under our discrimination and harassment prohibition policy, and I'm also involved in helping address those cases. So because you don't have to know whether it was gender-based or not, in either case it creates a potential violation of our standards of conduct, and we'd ask you to report that so that then I can further the investigation and help get to that. Okay, does that help?
Yep.
Okay, yes.
And if you are, so say you're not quite sure whether this is or whether this isn't, and we contact you, do you have an obligation, or should you also tell the student
That's a great question.
whether or not this is going on?
And I'm going to have a slide that helps us talk about that. So if I don't answer it clearly enough for you, please ask me again. So what I want to share first is where to report. So I've already been saying, talk to me, report it to me. So your primary place to report it to is to me as the Title IX coordinator and the Chief Compliance Officer. In addition, we have designated some additional individuals who can take these reports. Becky Lade as our Chief Human Resources Officer, Alicia Lynch and Chris Moore in Student Services are also going to be involved in helping me investigate Title IX associated cases. So student conduct issues could also come or as a concern. Now remember, this isn't Jake's conduct issue. This is potentially a conduct issue associated with the female student who was stalking him. So they may also be involved in this. But this is initially, we'd ask you to report primarily to me. If I'm not available, these individuals will take reports and then refer it to me so we can address that. I want to share the secondary piece, but I want to stress this is not individuals that you will need to report to. John in security, if we determine this is Clery related, I have to report it to John because John is the one who keeps track of our Clery reportable crimes and is the one who will post them on our website at the appropriate intervals. So I would report, if I determine it was a Clery violation, I would report it to John for reporting. There also could be consideration for when is it appropriate to involve law enforcement. And I'm going to ask Dr. Gray to talk a little bit about that.
So a question came up, and we'll cover this in more depth about, well, I'm sitting there as a student's advisor, and now I'm in a situation where I need to report this. And depending on what the student, what the student's next sentences were, and we purposely cut this off where we did, because we don't know what they're going to say next. Could be anything. Maybe the student's going to say, I'm afraid to go home tonight. I'm afraid this person's going to be standing at my apartment. Something like that. If we believe that there's been some sort of injury or some sort of injury that could occur, if there's an imminent danger to either the student or someone else, or we believe a crime has been committed, it isn't your job to pick up the phone and call the police, but we need to really think about getting the police involved. We're now in a criminal situation. We need to say to that student and encourage them, this has gone beyond what we can handle right here in this office. Now that may mean we walk them over to student counseling. It may mean we walk them over to a dean's office, or you go with them to report to the police. You absolutely want to support them. Don't say, yeah, run down to the police department on your own. We're there to support them, but we need to think about that. The other piece is that Erica's going to talk about more is, so what happens? You're now in a situation where you have to report. You're not saying to the student, I have to post this on the Pulse. You're saying to the student, I need to tell this to one person on campus. I am obligated to do that. It's not going to become public, but I'm obligated by law to report this to one of our primary contacts. And I'll let Erica go on.
So this gets to your question. We do want you, in the course of your conversation with the student, to let them know that you're going to share details about what the student reported. Because we're concerned about it, you're going to report that and who you're going to report it to. So that our Title IX coordinator, our chief compliance officer. And the reason I'm going to do that as a faculty member and report that is because Erica's in a better position to help determine what our next steps are in resolving and remedying this situation for you. So we want them to know you're going to report that. You're going to share that information. We also want you to refer the student to support services. And we have a number of them, and Deborah's going to talk a minute about the benefits of being able to report them to student services, but also how you can reinforce that as a positive thing. So we have Student Counseling Center, we have Employee EAP, and there's also external resources for people who feel they've been victimized. And we don't know how Jake's feeling about this, but could potentially play out, again, depending on what the rest of the conversation is. We've created a tool for you that we're referring to as the victim handout. It is available on Pulse. We made a copy and put it on the table for you because that goes into some additional detail that I know you all haven't seen before. We're just kind of preparing and pulling these things together. But this document is something that you could put into the hands of Jake or a student for them to review, and it explains what our process is. It explains the resources that we have available to us and what we'll do. And likely, if they're coming forward and talking about something like this that could be very traumatic for them, they may not hear all of the supportive things that you're telling them. So having something they can walk away with is useful. And that's the purpose of having that victim handout. So we want you to, determine. Now, if they clearly don't feel victimized, you don't have to give it to them. We want you to know it's there as a resource, and you need to use your judgment about, is this a tool that would be useful in this case to help support our student? And then to explain to the student what will happen, that a report will be made, that Erica will oversee an investigation to determine if there is what kinds of remedies that would be appropriate to help continue to protect the student. And again, our goal is to make sure that our students feel safe in the educational environment. So what can we do to help change this dynamic that this student is clearly feeling? Again, in terms of reporting and follow-up, we want you to offer assistance to the student to report. As Jeff said, you know, at DMU, we can issue a student a no contact directive, okay? A student doesn't necessarily have to comply with that. We're going to take disciplinary action if they don't. But a court, the police, if they're involved, they can issue no contact orders, which as a legal document are very different in terms of how binding they can be, and police are in a position to take some additional action that clearly we can't. If the scenario rises to that level, we want the student to know law enforcement can be of assistance in these cases. We want to support them in reporting to law enforcement if that's something they feel comfortable doing. So then you'll report the details to me or the designee, but then don't tell anybody else. We want to support that, keeping it as confidential as possible. And then documenting what was said, not what you interpret to have happened. And ultimately, if I determine this is a discrimination or harassment case under Title IX or not, I'll probably ask you to turn over your documentation to me so that we keep all of our documentation on this case in a single file, a single resource. So I'm going to stop there and let Deborah talk, and then we have another scenario that will allow you to think about some of the things I just shared. And sure.
Erica, just quickly, where do we keep this document?
Well, initially, I'd suggest you keep it in wherever you keep other notes of a confidential nature about student interactions that you have. So if you have an advising file, you can keep it in there. However, you're currently doing it to keep things confidential and private.
We're going to spend a few minutes going through some quick and easy steps you can use with every student who comes in your office about pretty much everything to be supportive and warm and caring and also productive in your meetings with them. So I wanted to include this little cartoon on the first slide, and if you can read it, the staff of the emergency plumbing hotline felt that the pursuit of empathy with the customer had gone too far. And then he's saying, to dump a bucket of water in my head, press 1, and then there's buckets of water. So this is here to remind you that you are faculty advisors, and you're not therapists, and you're not best friends of students. And so you have limits and boundaries with what you need to do and with what you can do, and I encourage you to be aware of them and respect them. So just quickly, these are the 5 easy steps that I'm going to advise you to use. The first one is understand, then empathize, express concern, refer, and follow up. Understand. Now this may seem obvious. Of course you want to understand what the student is coming in with, right? But you would be surprised how quick people skip to problem solving before they really understand what the whole situation is. And you may have to go double back once you get additional information. So make sure you use open-ended questions, tell me what's going on, understand it well enough so that you can explain it to somebody else. And then check to see how the student is doing. Are they sleeping? Are they eating? Are they going to class if they typically go to class? And of course, you know a therapist is going to say this, right? Empathize. But this is a very crucial part of your interaction with the student. Listen without judgment. And remember, the student is suffering if they're coming to you, especially if it's having to do with a personal problem. Most of them are already embarrassed or ashamed when they walk in the door that they have to talk to you about this at all. So keep this in mind. This is a rough thing for the student to have to do. Summarize and emphasize. Sounds like the breakup has been really rough for you. And validate, which can be really helpful for students to hear. I'm really glad you came to talk to me. I think that was a really good idea. I'm glad you're here. And make sure your nonverbals match with your verbals, so you don't want to be really empathic and then just, doing something like that. Okay, clearly express your concern and what you're concerned about. I am really worried about you because you seem exhausted, tired, angry, and you aren't going to class and you're not able to concentrate and you told me you're not eating very well. Make sure that you don't sort of just say, I'm concerned because you seem to have major depressive disorder and I think you need help. don't want to go there, right? Keep the labels and the diagnoses, in your own thoughts. And it's really essential that the student knows you truly care. The intervention of simply saying, I care about you and want to help means amazing things to the student. You may not know how much power you have over how a student is doing, especially when you're dealing with a crisis or something difficult. One line of I care about you makes a huge impact to your students. and then refer, okay? Of course, you're going to be referring likely to other places other than the Student Counseling Center. I would accept that and expect that. But referring, there's a couple of tricks that will help you do a really good referral for students. Of course, start with, have you thought about talking to someone at the Counseling Center? They may already be going there. And give your recommendation and your opinion that it can really help a student to get through a tough situation if they go to the Counseling Center. Now, a lot of students think that you have to be crazy to walk in the door, and that's not the case. Clearly, that's not the case. And so telling them you've referred students before, you've gotten good feedback, hopefully you've gotten good feedback, and that you think it would be a really good idea to talk to someone who isn't biased, to keep things completely confidential, and give them a very strong recommendation. Emphasizing the confidentiality is really important, and an easy example is to tell the student, you can go in and complain about me for 45 minutes and I will never know what you said, or that you came at all. And the last tip that I give people is the more personal you can make that recommendation, the better, because they do really value your opinion and trust it. And so if you know one of us personally, it's a good thing to drop our name. If they hear a personal name, I know this person, they're kind, they're warm, I think you'd really connect with them, I think they could really help you. It really goes very, very far in encouraging them and pushing them over the edge to actually go. And then just sort of the basic information about referral, give them the information to schedule an appointment, and we emphasized almost to death counseling at dmu.edu. I think we said it 16 or 17 times in our orientation presentation to them. And then this is our new central phone number worked by an administrative assistant. So you can call this number, and that's the admin for all the student counselors here, and they will find one of us or make an appointment if the student needs to. If a student is in crisis, you can just walk them over, and we will see them if you think they need to be seen right away. If you have to interrupt a session, we'll do that. The best way to do this is go to AC 435, which is where our current admin is sitting, and say, I have a student who needs to see somebody right away, and then she will find which one of us is available or which one of us is in session, or the best one of us to interrupt. If you get a chance to drop a call or an email and let us know you're coming over, that would be great. Then we can prepare ahead of time. And then follow-up. Good to check in with the student, see how it was, see what their experience is like, and see if there's anything else that you need. Well, that they need. And also, just one last point is sometimes we have faculty ask about this, which is that if you call to follow up with us and you say, I would like to know if Joe Schmo came to their appointment, we can't tell you because of confidentiality. But even if we could tell you, I would actually advise you to talk to the student and ask them instead, because it's a very good reinforcement that they're doing a good thing. So, but I wanted to just make this point because sometimes that can be confusing. And the last thing I'd just like to say is, remember, we are here for you too. We are not just here for students. If you have concerns about a student, you don't know what to say in a conversation like this, you have questions, you want to talk to us, please call and consult. We are really here for you, and we want you to know that we want to provide support to you as well. You can either call the main number or again use counseling@dmu.edu, and thank you for all that you do.